After catching her boyfriend cheating, the black female intern, wearing a crisp white shirt and a high bun, finds herself drawn to the dangerous charm of the cold CEO, a powerful and mysterious man. Ironically, the CEO is her boyfriend's father. At first, she only wanted to get revenge on her ex, but once she crosses the line with the CEO, their relationship quickly turns into a game of secrets and control. Will the intern choose to stop or dive even deeper? Where are you listening to this story from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the thrilling next chapters. The Manhattan morning was a canvas of unrelenting grey. Heavy rain lashed against the towering glass facades of the financial district, distorting the city below into a blurred sea of yellow cabs and hurried umbrellas. Inside the monolithic headquarters of Sterling Financial, however, the climate-controlled air remained perfectly still, carrying only the faint, metallic scent of ozone and the quiet hum of immense wealth. Maya Washington sat alone at her desk in the outer ring of the corporate strategy division. At 24, she was an intern, though the title communicated almost nothing about her actual utility to the firm. She was a black woman who had fought her way out of a working-class neighborhood in Brooklyn to earn a full scholarship to Columbia University. That relentless fight had shaped her into someone formidable. She was entirely uninterested in the superficial office politics that consumed her peers. Her appearance was a meticulously crafted armor, a crisp, unwrinkled white button-down shirt tucked into a tailored skirt, her dark hair pulled back into a severe high bun that left her sharp cheekbones and observant eyes fully exposed. She was a woman who understood the art of projecting flawless competence. Currently, her attention was locked on a sprawling financial spreadsheet. In the process of gathering raw data for an upcoming corporate merger, she had ventured past her assigned parameters and stumbled into the ledger of the equities division. It was the department managed by Julian Sterling. As Maya traced the lines of data, a cold knot formed in her stomach. It was subtle at first, a cluster of irregular capital expenditures appearing at low frequencies, mimicking the rhythm of legitimate operational costs. But Maya saw it. The pattern was wrong. Funds were being quietly diverted, siphoned off into external holding accounts that had no clear connection to the merger. It was a deliberate, methodical bleeding of company assets. Someone in Julian's department, perhaps Julian himself, was funneling a massive stream of money out into the dark. She closed the file, locking the screen. She needed to speak with Julian. Not just because he was the director of the department, but because he was her boyfriend of 8 months. Julian Sterling was 27 years old, possessing the kind of effortless, golden boy handsome features that only generational wealth could buy. He wore bespoke Italian suits and carried an aura of arrogant entitlement that most people mistook for confidence. Unlike Maya, Julian had never had to fight for a single thing in his life. He was a man who relied entirely on the weight of his last name to navigate the world. Lacking the actual operational competence required to run the division he had been handed. Hoping to catch him before the morning briefings, Maya purchased 2 cups of artisan black coffee from the lobby cafe. She navigated the quiet, carpeted corridors toward the executive suites, intending to surprise him. When she reached his corner office, the heavy mahogany door was slightly ajar. Maya raised a hand to push it open, a soft smile finally breaking through her professional facade. Then she heard the sound. It was a low, unmistakable intake of breath, followed by a soft, breathless laugh. Maya froze. Through the narrow gap between the door and the frame, she saw them. Julian was leaned back against his expansive glass desk, his expensive tie discarded on the floor. Straddling him was a woman Maya did not immediately recognize. She was perhaps 30, with striking, heavily manicured features and cascading blonde hair. She wore a designer silk blouse that was currently unbuttoned, her demeanor radiating a vain, aggressive ambition. This was Elena, a senior consultant from a rival firm who frequented their building, a woman whose entire personality was built around acquiring whatever and whoever she wanted. Maya did not gasp. She did not push the door open to confront them. She did not give them a single moment to explain. In that frozen fraction of a second, the world narrowed to a sharp, ringing silence. The betrayal did not arrive as a burst of fiery anger, but as a deep, structural collapse within her chest. She had trusted him. She had compromised her own strict boundaries to let him in. With the quiet, deliberate control of a person actively managing an internal hemorrhage, Maya placed the 2 cups of coffee perfectly on the small credenza outside his door. She turned and walked away. Her posture remained flawless. Her footsteps made no sound on the thick carpet. Outwardly, she was the picture of supreme, unbothered professionalism. Inwardly, she was shattering, layer by layer. She reached the private executive elevator bank, her breathing becoming shallow and fast. She pressed the call button, staring at the polished steel doors. The tears were coming. She could feel the hot, humiliating sting of them behind her eyes. She clenched her jaw, digging her manicured fingernails into the palms of her hands, violently ordering herself to hold it together. "Not here," she told herself. "Do not break down here." The elevator announced its arrival with a soft chime. The steel doors slid open. Maya took half a step forward, her head lowered as she fought to blink away the moisture blurring her vision. She almost collided with the man stepping out. Victor Sterling stopped. He was 50 years old, standing well over 6 feet tall, and possessed a physical presence that seemed to consume all the oxygen in the space. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that whispered of obscene wealth. His dark hair was elegantly threaded with silver at the temples, but it was his eyes that demanded submission. They were a piercing, glacial grey. Victor was a man who had built a financial empire by ruthlessly crushing his competitors. He was entirely devoid of warmth, a man who viewed the world strictly in terms of leverage and absolute control. A tragedy early in his career had allegedly stripped away his capacity for empathy, leaving behind only a hyper-rational, calculating machine. For 3 agonizing seconds they stood in the threshold of the elevator. Victor looked down at her. He did not immediately step aside. His cold eyes swept over her. He registered the pristine white shirt, the severe high bun, and the sharp, intelligent angles of her face. And then he registered the sheer, raw devastation she was trying to hide. He saw the unshed tears glittering in her dark eyes, the slight, involuntary tremor of her lower lip, and the desperate, prideful way she held her chin high despite it all. Most people withered under Victor Sterling's gaze. They looked away. They apologized. Maya did not look away. Operating on pure instinct and the adrenaline of her heartbreak, she locked eyes with him. In her dark eyes there was no fear, only a raw, wounded defiance. It was a silent collision. A strange, electric tension flared between them, a heavy, suffocating gravity that made the air suddenly too thick to breathe. It was dangerous. It was entirely inappropriate. Victor's gaze darkened infinitesimally. A flicker of something unreadable, something predatory and deeply intrigued crossed his stoic features. He did not say a word. He simply held her gaze for a fraction of a second longer than was polite, before finally taking a deliberate step to the side. Maya stepped into the elevator, the heavy steel doors sliding shut, severing the connection. As the carriage began its rapid descent, the realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had seen that face in the lobby portraits. She had read about him in the financial pages. That was Victor Sterling, the CEO of the company, and more importantly, he was Julian's father, the man Julian feared more than anything else in the world. Standing alone in the descending elevator, the image of Julian and Elena flashed through her mind, immediately followed by the memory of Victor's piercing, dominant stare. The crushing weight of her grief suddenly receded, replaced by something much sharper, much colder. Maya looked up at her own reflection in the polished steel doors. Her tears had dried. A dangerous, quiet thought bloomed in the dark corners of her mind. Julian had taken everything from her. Perhaps it was time to take everything from him. The fluorescent lights of the data analytics bullpen flickered slightly, casting long, nervous shadows across Maya's desk. It had been 48 hours since the incident outside Julian's office. She had not confronted him. She had not answered his text messages, which ranged from casual check-ins to feigned concern about her absence. Instead, Maya channeled the cold, hollow rage burning in her chest into the one thing she could control: the numbers. She pulled up the internal network logs and cross-referenced them with the irregular capital expenditures she had discovered in Julian's department. To connect the dots, she needed to know exactly who the blonde woman was. Using the guest registry and security timestamps, Maya identified her. Her name was Elena Rostova. A quick dive into industry databases revealed that Elena was a 32-year-old senior acquisition strategist for Vanguard Capital, Sterling Financial's most aggressive rival. Elena was notorious in financial circles, a tall, statuesque woman with a reputation for ruthless efficiency and a habit of leaving shattered corporate structures in her wake. Her personality was notoriously predatory. She viewed corporate espionage not as a crime, but as a competitive sport. As Maya aligned Julian's department outflows with Vanguard's recent, suspiciously perfectly timed market acquisitions, a sickening realization washed over her. Julian was not just a cheating coward, he was a monumental liability. Whether blinded by lust or staggering incompetence, Julian was leaking highly classified merger data to Vanguard Capital through Elena. The betrayal was no longer just personal, it was corporate treason. The opportunity to strike presented itself the very next afternoon during the Q3 Merger Strategies Summit. As a mere intern, Maya's only role was to sit silently against the back wall and ensure the executive dossiers were properly bound and distributed. The grand boardroom was a theater of intimidation, dominated by a massive slab of black marble that served as the conference table. At the head of the table sat Victor Sterling, a monument of quiet, terrifying authority. The air in the room was thick with tension as Marcus Vance, the chief financial officer, fumbled through his presentation. Marcus was a stout, balding man in his late 50s, his face perpetually slick with nervous sweat. He was a relic of a bygone era, a man whose cautious, traditional accounting methods were woefully inadequate for modern high-frequency mergers. A disastrous product launch 3 years ago had permanently shattered his confidence, leaving him a stuttering mess whenever Victor's glacial gaze fell upon him. The projected valuation for the Apex acquisition, Marcus stammered, wiping his brow with a crumpled handkerchief, is subject to a 10% variance based on current market trends. Victor did not raise his voice. He did not need to. A 10% variance, Marcus, equates to $400 million. Are you asking me to gamble nearly $500 million on a trend you cannot quantify? The silence that followed was absolute. Julian, sitting halfway down the table, looked distinctly uncomfortable, staring hard at his iPad to avoid his father's wrath. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was completely out of his depth. From the shadows of the back wall, Maya spoke. The variance isn't based on market trends, Mr. Vance. It's an internal, structural flaw. Every head in the room snapped toward her. Julian's eyes widened in sheer panic, recognizing her voice. Maya stepped forward into the light, her posture impeccable in her signature white blouse and high bun. She bypassed Marcus entirely, her eyes locking directly onto Victor's cold, grey gaze. If you factor in the recent, undocumented capital diversions from our own equities division over the past 3 weeks, which align suspiciously with Vanguard Capital's sudden shift in asset hoarding, the Apex valuation isn't facing a 10% variance. It's facing a hostile counterbid. The numbers you are looking at are compromised. She projected the exact data sequence she had uncovered onto the main screen, flawlessly breaking down the complex algorithmic discrepancies in under 2 minutes without glancing at a single note. She did not explicitly name Julian as a traitor, but she meticulously exposed the massive hole in his department's data security. When she finished, she folded her hands in front of her. The boardroom was entirely paralyzed. Victor Sterling stared at her. The unreadable, predatory intrigue she had seen in the elevator flashed in his eyes again, but this time it was accompanied by a terrifying, silent approval. "Meeting adjourned," Victor commanded softly, not breaking eye contact with Maya. "Miss Washington, my office. Now." 10 minutes later, Maya stood in the center of the CEO's private sanctuary, a vast, minimalist space of glass, steel, and dark leather on the top floor of the building. Victor stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the rain-slicked city. He poured 2 glasses of aged bourbon, walking back to his desk to hand her one. Their fingers brushed. The contact was electric, sending a sharp, involuntary jolt up her arm. "You have a lethal mind, Miss Washington," Victor said, his deep voice vibrating in the quiet room. "And a remarkable lack of fear. You just humiliated my CFO and implied my son is either a fool or a thief." "I only presented the data, sir," Maya replied evenly, taking a small sip of the burning liquid, refusing to back down. "Julian is a disappointment. I have known this for years," Victor stated coldly, dismissing his own son with a wave of his hand as if he were a bad investment. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne, sandalwood and sharp citrus, enveloped her. "I do not tolerate incompetence. Effective immediately, you are no longer an intern. You are my special executive assistant. You report only to me. You will have full clearance to investigate the Vanguard leak." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. She had bypassed Julian entirely. She had been handed the ultimate weapon to destroy him. "I accept, Mr. Sterling." Later that evening, as Maya was leaving the building, Julian finally cornered her in the lobby. He looked frantic, his usual arrogant facade crumbling. "Maya, what the hell was that today? And why haven't you been answering my texts? Are you trying to ruin me in front of my father?" Maya looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No heartbreak, no warmth. Just cold detachment. Slowly, she lifted her new black executive access badge, letting it catch the lobby lights. "If you need to speak with me regarding company matters, Julian, you can schedule an appointment through the CEO's office. Have a good night." She walked past him, savoring the look of absolute shock and rising terror on his handsome face. But as the days turned into a week, Maya's triumphant revenge plan began to warp into something entirely unexpected. Working in close quarters with Victor Sterling was like dancing on the edge of a razor blade. He was demanding, relentless, and possessed a brilliance that matched, and often exceeded, her own. They spent late nights in his office, dissecting financial models in a high-stakes, intellectual sparring match. Maya had intended to use Victor as a pawn to inflict pain on Julian, but she quickly realized that Victor was no one's pawn. He was a master chess player, and his presence was overwhelmingly intoxicating. He noticed everything, the way she chewed on her pen when calculating risk, the subtle shift in her breathing when he leaned over her shoulder to inspect her monitor. His dominance was not just corporate, it was deeply, unnervingly primal. Maya found her gaze lingering on the strong lines of his jaw, the rolled-up sleeves of his dress shirt revealing corded forearms. She was a woman who prided herself on absolute control, yet every time Victor's dark, calculating eyes locked onto hers, she felt the terrifying, thrilling pull of the abyss. She had stepped into the forbidden zone seeking vengeance, but she was rapidly realizing she was in profound danger of being devoured by the very monster she sought to use. The assault did not begin with a loud crash, but with a silent, catastrophic bleed. At exactly 3:15 p.m. on a Thursday, a coordinated media strike hit the financial wires. Vanguard Capital, acting through a network of shell PR firms, released a flood of highly classified, heavily manipulated documents alleging structural insolvency within Sterling Financial's upcoming merger. Simultaneously, an automated algorithmic attack began aggressively shorting Sterling's stock. The building plunged into immediate chaos, alarms blared on the trading floors, and executive phones rang in a relentless, deafening chorus as millions of dollars evaporated from the company's market cap by the minute. In the heart of the cybersecurity command center, the atmosphere was suffocating. Enter Silas Thorne, the director of digital infrastructure. Silas was a 38-year-old insomniac who looked as though he had not seen natural sunlight in a decade. Tall, painfully gaunt, with a chaotic mop of brown hair and a permanent cynical scowl, he lived on artificial energy drinks and spite. A brilliant but deeply abrasive man, an ugly divorce had left him with zero tolerance for office politics. He respected only raw competence. Right now, Silas was losing. "The automated filters are being bypassed entirely," he shouted over the din, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "They're mimicking our internal traffic patterns using the backdoor Julian's department left open. If we shut down the main servers to purge it, we default on $3 billion in active international wire transfers." Maya did not ask for permission. She shoved past a group of panicked senior analysts and took the empty terminal beside Silas. Stripping off her suit jacket and tossing aside her usual immaculate composure, she dove straight into the raw code. She recognized the pattern Vanguard was using. It was the same anomalous rhythm she had spotted in Julian's ledgers. "Don't shut it down," Maya ordered, her voice cutting through the panic with absolute, icy authority. "We build a cage." Silas paused, glaring at the young black woman in the crisp white shirt who had just invaded his sanctuary. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "I'm the one who's going to save your job," she shot back, without looking up from the monitors. For the next 12 hours, Maya did not move from the screen. Drawing heavily on her deep-rooted knowledge of financial technology, she built temporary isolation barriers around the compromised segments. She constructed a manual redirect layer, intercepting Vanguard's algorithmic bots and funneling their hostile traffic into a phantom server, absorbing the blow without triggering a visible market failure. She hot-patched the bleeding nodes by hand, holding the massive, ancient infrastructure together through sheer will and terrifyingly precise mathematical intuition. Silas, recognizing a genius that matched his own, silently handed her a black coffee and fell into step beside her, following her commands as they fortified the walls. By 2:30 a.m., the bleeding had officially stopped. The stock price stabilized. The company had survived the night. The operations floor was a graveyard of exhausted engineers sleeping at their desks. Maya left them behind, her body numb, her mind still buzzing with the electric hum of the system. She rode the private elevator up to the top floor. The CEO's office was completely silent, illuminated only by the sprawling, glittering expanse of the Manhattan skyline outside the floor-to-ceiling glass. She walked in and collapsed onto the plush leather sofa, letting her head fall back, her eyes sliding shut. She was too tired to go home. She just needed a minute. "You saved my company tonight, Miss Washington." Maya's eyes snapped open. Victor Sterling stepped out from the shadows of the private bar in the corner of his office. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie hours ago. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal his forearms, making him look less like a corporate monarch and more like a dangerous apex predator at rest. He held 2 crystal glasses of a deep, blood-red vintage Bordeaux. He walked over and handed her one. Their fingers brushed, and the sudden, intense heat of his skin sent a jolt of adrenaline straight through her exhaustion. "I did what I was hired to do," Maya said, her voice surprisingly breathless. She took the glass, her eyes locked on his. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly dense. The adrenaline of the 12-hour crisis, the profound silence of the empty building, and the suffocating proximity of this man were creating a highly combustible atmosphere. Victor did not step back. He stood over her, his glacial grey eyes tracing the exhaustion in her features, the slight disarray of her usually perfect high bun, the way her chest rose and fell beneath her white shirt. "Julian is a fool," Victor murmured, his voice dropping to a low, rough register that vibrated in the quiet room. "He had a queen, and he treated her like a pawn. I do not make such mistakes." Maya's breath hitched. The original plan, The cold, calculating desire to use Victor to destroy his son suddenly felt entirely irrelevant. The magnetic pull of the man in front of her was obliterating her logic. She stood up, intending to put some professional distance between them, but the moment she was on her feet, she was only inches from his chest. She looked up at him, her dark eyes defiant, but burning with an undeniable, answering hunger. "What are you doing, Victor?" she asked, abandoning his title for the first time. "Taking what I want," he answered. Victor's hand wrapped around the back of her neck, his grip firm, possessive, and inescapable. He pulled her against him, and his mouth crashed down onto hers. There was no hesitation, no gentle inquiry. It was a kiss of absolute consumption. Maya gasped against his lips, the crystal glass slipping from her fingers and shattering on the thick carpet, the red wine spilling like blood. She did not care, her hands tangled in his dark, silver-threaded hair as she kissed him back with equal, desperate ferocity. All the anger, the betrayal, the immense pressure of the night ignited into a blinding flash of pure, unadulterated. He backed her against the heavy glass of the window, the city lights spinning dizzily behind him. His mouth moved to her jaw, his lips hot against her skin, unraveling the careful armor she wore every single day. When he finally pulled back slightly, both of them were breathing heavily. Victor looked down at her, his eyes dark with a terrifying level of possessiveness. His thumb traced her swollen lower lip. "Let me make one thing perfectly clear, Maya," he whispered, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "This is no longer about revenge. You are not playing a game with my son anymore. You stepped into my world, and now you are mine, in this office, in the boardroom, and in the dark. I will give you everything, but I demand absolute control. Do you understand?" Maya looked into the eyes of the man who owned the city, feeling the dangerous, thrilling weight of his cage closing around her. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into a beautiful, terrifying abyss. Slowly, deliberately, she nodded. Yes, the aftermath of the Vanguard cyber siege left Sterling Financial in a state of hyper-vigilance. The air in the building was thick with suspicion, every executive looking over their shoulder. For Maya, the crisis had only sharpened her focus. The temporary digital barricades she had built with Silas Thorne were holding, but they were not a permanent solution. She needed the root cause. She needed the smoking gun. Maya spent her Tuesday morning deep in the subterranean archives of the Internal Audit Department, a sterile, windowless labyrinth of humming servers and endless filing cabinets. She was not alone. Working beside her was Arthur Pendleton, the head of Internal Audit. Arthur was a man in his late 50s who looked as though he had been pressed and starched along with his grey suits. He was painfully thin, smelled faintly of peppermint and old paper, and possessed a personality utterly devoid of imagination. However, what Arthur lacked in creativity, he made up for with a terrifyingly meticulous memory for numbers and compliance protocols. A lifelong bachelor whose only companion was a temperamental Siamese cat named Duchess, Arthur treated corporate data with a religious reverence. Under Maya's specific directives, Arthur ran a granular diagnostic on the access logs from the night of the leak. "The firewall wasn't breached from the outside, Miss Washington," Arthur murmured, his nasal voice echoing slightly in the quiet room as he adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. He pointed a bony finger at the glowing monitor. The security protocols were disabled from a trusted internal node, specifically IP address ending in 409. The terminal was accessed using Level 4 executive credentials at 2:14 a.m. last Thursday. Maya leaned in, her heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She already knew whose terminal it was, but seeing the undeniable digital footprint made the reality cold and absolute. "Julian Sterling?" Maya said quietly. Arthur nodded, his expression grim. It wasn't an accidental phishing click or a stolen password. The biometric timestamp confirmed Julian was physically at his desk, granting access to the Vanguard data scrapers. Maya downloaded the encrypted access log onto a sleek, silver flash drive. As she slipped the cold metal into her skirt pocket, a heavy sense of dread washed over her. This was the executioner's blade. If she handed this silver drive to Victor, Julian's career would be instantly vaporized. He would face corporate exile, public humiliation, and potential criminal charges. A father would utterly destroy his own son. Maya had wanted revenge, but holding the actual instrument of Julian's demise made her hesitate. Did she really want to be the architect of a family's permanent fracture? Leaving the audit archives, Maya stepped out of the elevator into the main lobby, her mind churning with the weight of the evidence. She didn't make it far before a hand gently caught her elbow. Maya turned, her professional mask instantly sliding into place. It was Julian. He looked completely unraveled, a stark contrast to his usual arrogant, bespoke appearance. His golden boy hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, and the faint shadow of a beard darkened his jawline. The swagger was gone, replaced by a desperate, pathetic vulnerability. "Maya, please, just 5 minutes," Julian pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. He pulled her gently toward a quiet alcove near the decorative indoor waterfall, away from the prying eyes of passing analysts. "I've been losing my mind, I'm so sorry. Elena meant nothing, I swear to God. It was a stupid, meaningless mistake, and I haven't slept since you walked away." Maya looked at him, feeling a bizarre, sickening cocktail of emotions. A part of her felt a sharp, vicious stab of triumph. The man who had humiliated her was now begging like a stray dog. Yet, beneath the satisfaction, there was a surreal layer of detachment. Julian felt like a ghost from a past life. As he rambled on, making desperate promises of change and commitment, Maya's mind involuntarily flashed to the top-floor office. She remembered the bruising, possessive heat of Victor's mouth, the terrifying strength of his hands, and the dark, unapologetic way he had claimed her. The contrast was staggering. Julian was a frantic, drowning boy. Victor was the dark, immovable ocean. "Julian, stop," Maya said smoothly, pulling her arm away from his grasp. Her voice was calm, utterly devoid of the warmth he was so desperately seeking. "We are done. There is nothing left to salvage. I suggest you focus on your department." "It needs your attention more than I do." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing by the waterfall, looking utterly shattered. Maya thought the encounter was handled perfectly, but she had forgotten that in this building, nothing escaped the apex predator. 30 minutes later, her desk phone rang. It was a direct line from the CEO's suite. "My office. Now." The command was sharp and brief. When Maya entered the expansive glass office on the top floor, Victor was not sitting at his desk. He was standing by the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his dark suit. He did not offer her a drink today. He turned around, and the glacial fury in his grey eyes made Maya's breath catch in her throat. He had seen them. Whether from his vantage point overlooking the lobby or through the building's intricate security feeds, Victor knew. He closed the distance between them in 3 long, predatory strides. Maya instinctively took a step back, her back hitting the heavy oak door. Victor boxed her in, placing a hand on the wood beside her head, his towering frame completely suffocating her space. "I thought I made myself clear, Maya," Victor said, his voice dangerously soft, a lethal purr. "I do not share." "He cornered me in the lobby," Maya defended herself, her chin tilting up in defiance, though her pulse was racing frantically. "He was apologizing. I shut him down." "You allowed him to touch you," Victor corrected coldly. His hand moved from the door, his long fingers wrapping around her jaw, tilting her face up to meet his dark, obsessive gaze. The jealousy radiating from him was not the frantic, insecure jealousy of a boy. It was the cold, territorial rage of a monarch whose property had been trespassed upon. "Let me establish the new parameters of our arrangement. You do not speak to him unless it is strictly required for your duties. You do not entertain his apologies. Your time, your attention, and your loyalty belong entirely to me." Victor's thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, his touch burning against her skin. Slowly, deliberately, he moved his hand to the back of her head. With a swift, practiced motion, he pulled the pin from her signature high bun. Her dark hair cascaded down her shoulders in a sudden rush. "And you do not wear your armor when you are alone with me," he whispered, his lips grazing her ear, sending a violent shiver down her spine. The raw display of absolute dominance was overwhelmingly intoxicating, drowning out her logical mind in a flood of adrenaline and lust. He kissed her then, not with passion, but with punishing ownership, a physical branding designed to erase any lingering trace of his son. Later that evening, Maya sat alone in her apartment. The city lights cast long shadows across her small living room. Her hair was still down, her lips still bruised from Victor's demanding kiss. She placed the sleek silver flash drive on the glass coffee table in front of her. She was trapped in a beautiful, terrifying nightmare. The thrill of Victor's power was a drug she was rapidly becoming addicted to, but his dictatorial control was a slowly tightening noose around her neck. She looked at the drive containing Julian's absolute ruin. If she gave it to Victor, she would prove her ultimate loyalty to the CEO, sealing her pact with the devil. If she hid it, she would be lying to the most dangerous man she had ever met. Maya closed her eyes, the silence of her apartment suddenly feeling deafening. She had stepped into the dark to play a game, but she was slowly realizing she was no longer the player. She was the prize, and she didn't know how to stop. The storm that had been brewing over Sterling Financial finally broke, not with thunder, but with the sudden, violent swing of a heavy oak door. Maya was standing behind the massive marble desk in the CEO's suite, reviewing a printed dossier. Victor was standing impossibly close, his broad chest brushing her shoulder as he leaned in to inspect the document. Her hair, per his strict, unspoken mandate whenever they were alone, was cascading freely down her back. The air between them was thick with an electric, undeniable intimacy. Suddenly, a sharp commotion erupted from the outer reception area. The intercom buzzed frantically. It was Eleanor, Victor's veteran executive secretary. Eleanor was a woman in her late 60s with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a wardrobe consisting entirely of rigid tweed suits. She possessed the icy, unflappable demeanor of a seasoned prison warden and had guarded Victor's door for 20 years, utterly immune to bribery, charm, or intimidation. "Mr. Sterling, Julian is—" Eleanor's warning was cut short as Julian physically shoved past the older woman, bursting into the private sanctuary. He looked wildly unhinged, his designer tie loosened, his eyes frantic as he prepared to demand another audience with his father. But the words instantly died in his throat. Julian froze. He stared at the tableau before him. He saw the proximity. He saw Maya's usually strict posture softened, her face flushed, and her signature severe bun undone, the dark locks spilling beautifully over the crisp white collar of her shirt. But more damning than any of that was Victor. The older Sterling did not flinch, step back, or look the least bit guilty. Instead, Victor's posture subtly shifted into something overtly territorial, a silent alpha predator claim over the woman standing beside him. The air in the room grew suffocatingly dense. Julian's eyes darted between his father's cold, unyielding face and Maya's dark, unreadable eyes. He did not catch them in bed. He did not need to. The devastating, unnatural truth slammed into him with the force of a freight train. His ex-girlfriend, the woman he had betrayed and discarded, was involved with his father. Julian's face drained of all color, taking on a sickly, ashen hue. His mouth opened and closed silently, his reality entirely shattered. Unable to process the monstrous humiliation and the profound psychological blow from his own blood, Julian stumbled backward turning and fleeing the office without a single word. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving a ringing, heavy silence in its wake. Victor casually straightened his bespoke cuffs, entirely unbothered by the absolute annihilation of his son. He needed to learn his place eventually, Victor murmured, his voice as cold and smooth as glass. Maya stepped away from him, the physical distance suddenly feeling like a violent tearing in her chest. The sickening reality of what had just transpired washed over her. She watched Victor, seeing the terrifying lack of empathy in his grey eyes. He had enjoyed it. He had wanted Julian to know, to finalize his ultimate dominance over both of them. Suddenly, the intoxicating spell of Victor's power shattered. Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out the sleek, silver flash drive containing the evidence of Julian's treason. She set it on the glass coffee table with a sharp clink. "This is what you wanted," Maya said, her voice trembling slightly before solidifying into pure, unyielding steel. "Proof that Julian authorized the Vanguard data breach. It's all there." Victor looked at the drive, a slow, approving smile touching his lips as he reached out to pull her back against him. "You have performed flawlessly, Maya. You belong here with me." "No!" Maya stepped back out of his reach, her dark eyes flashing with a sudden, fierce clarity. "I don't!" Victor's smile vanished instantly, his jaw tightening into a hard line. Maya held her ground, refusing to cower before the monarch. "I wanted to hurt him, Victor. I wanted him to bleed the way he made me bleed, and when I stepped into your orbit, I fell for you. God help me, despite everything, I actually fell in love with you." The confession hung in the air, raw and devastatingly vulnerable, causing a microscopic, unprecedented fracture in Victor's stoic facade. "But I will not be your pawn, and I will not be a secret you keep in the dark just to feed your ego. I'm not a prize you won from your son to prove a point. I am Maya Washington. I refuse to be a puppet in this twisted family game of control." She turned her back on the most powerful man she had ever known, pinned her hair back up into a severe bun with shaking hands, and walked out the door, reclaiming her armor. 2 hours later, the atmosphere in the executive boardroom was violently tense. An emergency meeting of the board of directors had been convened to address the Vanguard crisis. Sitting at the far end of the marble table was Reginald Sterling, Victor's 75-year-old uncle, and the senior-most board member. Reginald was a formidable relic, a man with a hawkish nose and a silver-tipped cane who viewed the company not as a business, but as a sacred bloodline. He was deeply traditional, completely ruthless, and notorious for crucifying anyone who jeopardized the firm's legacy. "We are bleeding out, Victor!" Reginald slammed his cane against the floor, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "The shareholders are demanding a head on a pike for this security breach. Who left the door open?" Before Victor could answer, the boardroom doors swung open. Maya walked in. She was no longer wearing the vulnerability she had shown in Victor's office. She was clad in her flawless corporate armor, her expression an impenetrable mask of absolute competence. Ignoring the shocked murmurs of the elite board members, she walked straight to the podium and plugged the silver flash drive into the main console. "I have the answer to your question, mister." "Sterling!" Maya announced, her voice projecting clearly and calmly across the massive room. She brought up the encrypted access logs, projecting them onto the main screens. Flawlessly, mercilessly, she walked the board through the digital footprints. She detailed how Julian's terminal, using Level 4 biometric authentication, had disabled the firewalls at 2:14 a.m. She connected the dots between Julian, Elena Rostova, and the hostile market moves by Vanguard Capital. She did not raise her voice, she did not gloat, she simply executed the corporate equivalent of a public execution. The silence that followed her presentation was profound. Reginald Sterling stared at the data, his aged face contorted in sheer disgust. Julian, who had been summoned to the meeting to defend his department, sat trembling in his leather chair. He was completely destroyed, unable to mount a single word of defense against the undeniable truth. He was a traitor, ousted by his own arrogance and sheer stupidity. "Get him out of my sight," Reginald barked, waving a dismissive hand at his grandnephew. Security was immediately called, and 2 guards stepped forward to escort a weeping, broken Julian from the premises. The company was saved from structural collapse, the data leak was permanently sealed, and the traitor was purged from the ranks. As the board members began to murmur in awe of the young black assistant who had just outmaneuvered a massive corporate espionage plot with cold precision, Maya looked across the table. Her eyes met Victor's. He was staring at her, not with his usual dark anger, but with a profound, terrifying reverence. She had not just played the game, she had dominated his entire board. But as she quietly closed her laptop and prepared to leave the room, Maya knew the real game, the battle for her own freedom, was just reaching its final act. The morning after the catastrophic board meeting, the atmosphere on the top floor of Sterling Financial was eerily quiet. The swift, brutal amputation of Julian Sterling from the company's hierarchy had been executed with Victor's signature ruthlessness. Julian was stripped of his title, his equity, and his access to the Sterling family trust. He was entirely banished, left to rebuild a life without the unearned safety net he had abused for so long. Inside the CEO's office, Victor sat behind his massive marble desk, his pen hovering over the final severance documents. He looked up as the heavy oak doors opened. Maya walked in. She was dressed in her pristine white button-down shirt and a tailored pencil skirt, her dark hair pulled back into its severe, signature high bun. She walked with the poised, unshakable confidence of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged as forged steel, but she was not carrying the morning briefings. Instead, she stepped up to the marble desk and placed 2 items gently on its polished surface, her black executive access badge and a crisp, white envelope containing her formal resignation. Victor's grey eyes dropped to the envelope, a dangerous stillness washing over his large frame. The triumphant, possessive satisfaction he had carried since her brilliant performance in the boardroom evaporated. "Explain this," he demanded, his voice a low, warning rumble. Maya did not flinch. She met the gaze of the most terrifying man in Manhattan with absolute, unwavering clarity. "I am leaving, Victor," she said smoothly. "My work here is done. The leak is sealed, the threat is neutralized, and I have achieved what I originally set out to do." Victor stood up, his imposing height instantly casting a shadow over her. "You are my special executive assistant. You just secured your place at the very top of this empire. I am offering you the world, Maya, and you are handing me a piece of paper." He rounded the desk, stopping just inches from her, the familiar, intoxicating heat of his proximity pulling at her senses. "I told you yesterday that I love you," Maya replied, her voice softening just a fraction, revealing the genuine ache beneath her armor. "But if what we have is going to be real, it cannot exist in the shadow of this building. I refuse to be your subordinate. I refuse to be the secret affair of the CEO, a woman who traded one sterling for another to climb the corporate ladder. You are a man who survives by controlling every variable, Victor, but you cannot control me. If I stay, I will eventually become a prisoner of your power, and the love I have for you will turn into resentment." For a long, agonizing moment, Victor stared down at her. Every instinct in his predatory nature screamed at him to lock the doors, to use his wealth, his leverage, and his dark seduction to force her to stay. He was a monarch. He did not surrender. But as he looked into Maya's beautiful, defiant eyes, he saw a woman whose brilliance and fierce independence mirrored his own. To cage her would be to destroy the very fire that had drawn him to her in the first place. Slowly, the hard, ruthless lines of his face softened into something entirely unprecedented. Surrender. Victor raised a hand, his long fingers gently tracing the line of her cheek, a touch devoid of ownership, filled only with a quiet, profound respect. "You are the most extraordinary creature I have ever encountered, Maya Washington," he murmured, his voice thick with raw emotion. He stepped back, deliberately giving her the space she demanded. "Go! Build your empire." 6 months later, the biting wind off Lake Michigan whipped through the bustling streets of downtown Chicago. Miles away from the suffocating shadows of Manhattan, a sleek new office space opened its glass doors on the magnificent mile. The frosted lettering on the entrance read, "Washington Strategic Analytics." Inside, the atmosphere was buzzing with electric, optimistic energy. Enter Leo Vance, Maya's newly hired junior analyst. Leo was 22, a fresh-faced, chaotic genius from Northwestern University who practically vibrated with too much espresso and ambition. With his perpetually rumpled curly hair, oversized thick-rimmed glasses, and a habit of speaking entirely in rapid-fire financial jargon, Leo was a stark contrast to the rigid, terrifying executives of Maya's past. "Boss, the preliminary risk assessments for the tech merger are compiled," Leo announced, nearly tripping over a decorative ficus plant as he rushed into her office, dropping a massive stack of perfectly bound dossiers onto her desk. "And the caterers for the opening reception are setting up in the lobby." Maya smiled warmly at the young man, thanking him before turning back to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Chicago skyline. She looked phenomenal. She still wore her signature armor, the immaculate white shirt, and the severe high bun, but it no longer felt like a defensive shield. It was her crown. She was no longer an intern, nor a pawn, nor a secret. She was the CEO. The grand opening of her own consulting firm was a testament to her unyielding will. As she stood watching the afternoon traffic, a courier entered her office, carrying a large, breathtaking arrangement of flowers. They were not standard celebratory lilies or orchids. They were black Baccara roses, dark, velvety, and deeply dangerous. Maya's breath hitched as she stepped forward, pulling the small, heavy cardstock from the blooms. The handwritten note contained only a single line. "To the Queen, who built her own board." Her heart suddenly hammering a frantic, undeniable rhythm against her ribs, Maya turned and looked back out the glass window, her eyes scanning the street below. There, parked silently across the avenue, was a sleek, midnight black Maybach. The rear door opened. Victor Sterling stepped out onto the Chicago pavement. He looked strikingly different. The intimidating, bespoke corporate armor was gone. He wore a dark, fine-knit cashmere turtleneck and tailored slate trousers, looking effortlessly commanding but profoundly human. He stood by the car, the cold wind ruffling his silver-threaded hair, and looked up at her window. Even from the street, the intensity of his grey eyes reached her, but this time there was no demand for submission. He simply smiled, a genuine, warm, and slightly vulnerable smile. Maya felt a sudden, brilliant rush of joy. She did not hesitate. Leaving the dossiers on her desk, she walked out of her office, past a bewildered Leo, and took the elevator down to the lobby. She pushed through the glass doors, stepping out into the crisp, biting air of her new city. She stopped on the edge of the sidewalk, looking across the street at the man who had once been her destruction, her temptation, and her commanding officer. Now, as the traffic cleared between them, they simply looked at each other as equals. They were no longer bound by deceit, corporate hierarchy, or the toxic ghosts of the past. Maya smiled, a radiant, triumphant expression, and took a step off the curb. The game of control was over. The real story was just beginning. The ending of this story leaves us with a gentle and beautiful lesson for our daily lives. True love and respect cannot grow in the shadows of control or inequality. Sometimes you have to be brave enough to walk away from a toxic situation, even if it breaks your heart. When you focus on building your own worth and standing on your own 2 feet, you will eventually attract the right people who respect you as an equal. We all deserve to be a queen or a king in our own lives, not a pawn in someone else's game. In our everyday lives, it is easy to lose ourselves in relationships or jobs where we feel undervalued. Please remember that your dignity is your most valuable asset. Do not settle for being a secret or second best. If you found this story inspiring, please share it with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more meaningful stories. May God bless you and your loved ones with the strength to always know your worth and the courage to build your own happiness. If you believe in your own inner strength and trust in a better new beginning, please comment Amen below to share this positive energy.